Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another edition of PRI Young Leaders Circle Speakers Series. It's an ongoing series we do where we talk to young professionals, folks in think tank world and government, emerging industries. Today, more entrepreneurial freelance focus is we have Gabriella Hoffman. Gabrielle, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Evan. Nice to talk to you.
So, Gabrielle, we were joking about you have many titles, podcaster, freelance journalist, columnist. I'm reading my list here, media strategist, consultant. My favorite cool one, award-winning outdoor writer. So it's a lot of great titles. Maybe take us to, you have kind of your own shop. You're a one-woman show, so to speak. Take us to kind of how you got to this point, and then talk a little bit about what you do.
Sure thing. Well, let's see. I kind of went the untraditional media route. I didn't go to journalism school.
Okay.
I didn't really do much of formal journalism training until I got into, I would say, postgraduate life in college. Although I would say, I take that back. I actually did have a little bit of experience on my college campus. I wrote for the conservative paper called the California Review, at UC San Diego, where I'm a proud alumna. I'm a little disappointed in the direction it's going, but 2012 graduate of UCSD, and really wanted to go to a school where I could somehow engage in campus media in some fashion. And UCSD didn't really have something like a UCLA or UC Berkeley kind of focus. You would always hear stories from those schools. And I was thinking, like, maybe there's much to the facade of UCSD. There's more to the facade, and there probably has to be something to uncover, good and bad, on the campus. So joined in actually right before I started school. It was the campus meetup day when you welcome new students. And It was May of 2009. I was finishing my senior year of high school, and I specifically sought out the group, and I was like, hey guys, like, I'm coming to UCSD, I'm confirming, and I want to join you. And so they were very accommodating. They welcomed me, and I began there, and I wrote for them in different type of positions for the course of my 3 years there. So it was a lot of fun. And then it segued into radio work when I was I would say, finishing my freshman year, or my first year, because I graduated in 3 years. So I can't really say I did freshman, senior type of stuff. I skipped a year. Yeah. All those AP credits from high school saved me a lot of money, and it was worth it. I have no regrets graduating early.
That's a good plug to take your AP classes.
Yes. If they still exist.
I think they do.
They're transforming them. They're trying to get, because they say the meritocracy component to it is disadvantageous to certain demographics, which I think is ludicrous with respect to that. But took those classes, was a campus activist. Actually, I started a Young Americans for Freedom chapter before Young America's Foundation and YAF merged much later. So I was part of the student organization. I would say my first formal political training I took was with the Leadership Institute, where I was employed at from 2012 to 2016. So I took their youth leadership school, got really excited with youth activism. I hosted a speaker, David Horowitz, at my campus at the height of the so-called Israel Apartheid Week. That event went viral and kind of catapulted me in my career. When that moment between Horowitz and a student who was very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause got into a debate, and she said she was for, like, the equivalent of a second Holocaust, very ridiculous. And from there, I was able to get a internship with Young America's Foundation at their Reagan Ranch Center. So I kind of got exposed to different skill sets. I learned how to transcribe, which is super important if you want to do journalism, whether in the freelance or full-time capacity. Yep. So even with my internship, which wasn't really a media internship, I was able to take away some really practical skills to take with me, I guess, in my media journey. And from there, it just built up. And I did a social media internship, a freelance social media internship, actually, remote one, before remote work was kind of cool, in 2011, going into my final year of college with a husband-wife duo who do a lot in conservative movement. Now they were focusing on energy. Now they do stuff on kind of like the pro-life and whatever angle and media bias. And then when I finished college, I got a acceptance into the Media Research Center's internship program. So that was my formal, I would say, foray into journalism, aside from the work I was doing, working on radio, social media. So I kind of learned the importance of doing multimedia from a really early age. I really wanted to get experience doing the straight journalism beat too, because it's extremely important. And when time came to realize, do I want to do this full time, going the traditional journalism route in 2012, I wasn't certain, not because I doubted my capabilities. I think I could have been totally capable of doing it, but it was really hard to find a job at that time in 2012. We were still reeling in from the economic collapse of 2008. And journalism even then was a very saturated field. Social media was just emerging. So you didn't really have people competing for jobs or having to measure up somehow.
Right.
And so when I got presented with a job with Leadership Institute, I finished my Media Research Center internship. And then I moved on to work for Leadership Institute, where I was able to do a lot of writing on the side, in addition to my work with their campus program, their campus leadership program. And I was able to help students get media mentions. Some of them were placed on Fox News with my identification and help, which was super awesome. And then I was able to do some columns. I think at the time I was saying too many different opinions, nothing damaging or problematic, but I recognized like maybe I could have channeled that a little bit better. But I was pretty active on social media really early on, and that really helped me kind of catapult my digital profile, which was great to do. And I started writing more, and I didn't want to just be a talker. And when time came for me to decide my next move in my career, I was looking to do some media stuff, thought I took a good opportunity. Turned out it didn't work out so well after finishing my time at Leadership Institute. And I just kind of was handed an opportunity out of necessity, and also I think out of desire too. It was kind of twofold, my decision to go on my own. Okay. And I realized that at that time, being 25 at that point in time, presidential year, lots of changes. So I didn't know what was going to happen in Washington. I was kind of uncertain about my prospects, but had Hillary Clinton when I was like, I don't know if I could do this freelance business thing with her. And so with Trump, it was interesting to see how that happened. And I was actually surprised to see that he was actually pretty pro-business, and he assuaged a lot of my fears. And actually, he was a pro-freelance president. He didn't talk about the issue much. Yeah. And you now look at this situation and you're like, oh gosh, we actually have a president now who is anti-freelance. He's openly anti-freelance, and that concerns me a lot. But I think I was able to see growth in my business and go into it at a really good time when you saw a period of strong economic growth for the most part, I would say. Just different opportunities, and people assume that because I went on my own, I was just handed opportunities, like it was super easy, I'm swimming in wealth. And that's not the case. I had to start from the bottom. I had to start from the bottom again, kind of like what I did in college, to build up my skill set and to build up my portfolio and attention and trust with people. And even if you're well connected, you sometimes have to do it if you go into a different industry, away from nonprofit work or in politics. I kind of wanted to leave the so-called political industrial complex somewhat. Like I would say 50% immersed in it. And now I like having private sector clients too, and people who are not necessarily involved in politics. Yep. And from what I've been able to learn from that experience, building up my skill set, even adding more to what I know, working with a different portfolio of clients across the years, high dollar, medium sized, smaller dollar clients. And people just have this thirst for wanting to do better, get media attention. And I noticed there was a deficit in media PR offerings a lot. And even in DC, people would charge way too much money for their services. And a lot of people had come back to me and said, had I known, not because I was cheapening my rates or anything, I was charging a fraction of what some of the bigger conglomerates were charging. And they said, well, I could have worked with you and you've got me placed. And I said, I know. I said, don't worry about it. Like there's always a next time in the future if you're interested. And so I recognized that so many of these PR shops were not adapting to the changing digital media landscape. They weren't teaching people how to use social media. They weren't telling people how to use video, how to utilize video, and just kind of being on the cutting edge of different things. So it was an interesting blend of digital, traditional media, learning the ropes, kind of building a Rolodex of reporters that I could reach out to for clients that fit their, I would say, skill set or their interest or their kind of niche area, I would say, and developing relationships with people in the press across TV, radio, podcasting, things of that sort. And doing that today, even not so much interfacing with reporters, so much client interests have changed, and they see that you can actually garner attention without necessarily reaching out to reporters, or I may do some occasional press releases to groups of reporters, but much of my work now is me creating content for clients, which is kind of cool, whether it's video or producing and editing different things or maintaining social media, things of that sort. So I really like what I do. I want to be able to do it still. I want to still be identified as an independent contractor. I can still work in politics, and all the while doing my consulting stuff, which is primarily how I sustain my livelihood. I also do a lot of paid writing opportunities through different outlets out there. And I've been able to do this and harness this ability all across the years through my college work, postgraduate work, and then now doing it full-time as a freelancer, and just be able to cover subjects that people don't often talk about or really see in a very clear light. I focus a lot on conservation, the great outdoors, hunting, fishing, a little bit into the energy environmental portfolio as well, just because I think so many people misunderstand the traditional energy industries. And it's not because I want to have the back of big oil or anything of that sort, but I think people underestimate kind of the different confluences that happen in the energy sector, their work in conservation, just different facets that you don't often see in beyond the media portrayals, like everything is bad, they're not doing their part to better the planet. So I look for things like that in my coverage. I've covered my family story. They fled the Soviet Union in the 80s. So I'm a first generation American, firstborn in my family here. And I talk about that and really want to educate people about knowing history so you don't repeat it. Of course, I think that's super important. And I've had my dad come on my podcast, and he's met different people in politics that I've taken him events to across the years, or people have just interfaced with him or my family, and they see kind of where I get my, I guess, interest in and my ideas from. So, hearkening back to that, I like to cover my family story. I've written about it for Town Hall on many occasions, and I'm hoping to do a bigger project in the future, maybe a podcast or some video series in the future, to kind of capitalize on that, since socialism seems to be a really interesting subject of late, and a hot button subject at that. And just covering a multitude of issues. I've focused largely recently on the PRO Act and the implications that come from that, stemming from California's AB5, which has given birth to this really convoluted and very potentially deleterious bill. And seeing what happened back in California, where I'm from originally, and seeing how that can be multiplied when applied nationally, and the proposals that are already inset in the bill, it worries me a lot, personally speaking, also from a kind of free enterprise or market perspective too, because I really think if government takes over this facet of the economy, it's a burgeoning market. It's 36% of the workforce, and more people are going to incline themselves to it because maybe they don't like that corporations are becoming too political. Maybe they hate their 9-to-5 job. People are going to be seeking alternatives, and they've been seeking alternatives in many different industries and spheres. That's why ride sharing is a really popular thing. That's why Airbnb is a really popular thing. So different industries are being creatively disrupted, and I think creative disruption is not a bad thing. And so the economy is now undergoing that transformation where you don't have to necessarily work a traditional workplace job or workplace setting. People are working remotely. They're having multiple gigs. And the notion that people working multiple gigs lack a high skill set, they're not motivated, really needs to be debunked. And that's what I hope to do in my coverage. So there's a multitude of subjects I cover. It just depends on what's on my radar. I sometimes focus on cultural issues, but I feel like that's becoming so highly saturated in center-right media. So I try not to focus on that. And I also do a lot of interviews with different lawmakers where we touch on these different subjects, what their view is of the future of conservatism. So I've been very lucky to be in a position where I can, as a freelancer, but tied to outlets like townhall.com, where I can interview lawmakers. I've interviewed Governor Kristi Noem. I just put out an interview with Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia. I've spoken to senators, past cabinet members. So it's really an honor to be in the position I've been in. And it's been a work in progress. It takes many years. I just didn't get these opportunities overnight. It took almost a decade, or even past a decade, of really working and building an experience, building trust, gaining people's confidence, and going to the field to report on these different stories. I think people think, well, you can just sit in your apartment or sit in your house in Washington or New York and really understand the American public. You can't. You have to go into the field. You have to submerge in people's different livelihoods or professions. I recently went to Florida in the Okeechobee region in the greater Everglades ecosystem, where I got to learn about ranching and how that actually contributes to betterment of the Lake Okeechobee watershed and the water quality issues there, and how they're maligned in many cases. And I spoke to people, and I'm about to debut this hopefully sometime next week, I believe, another story from Florida where there is this technological innovation. It's a public-private partnership, but it's basically the market trying to come in through a company, and they're taking noxious weeds and invasive plants from the Everglades, crunching it and making it into obviously type of compost-like material. So you can use that as fertilizer to replenish farmlands and ranch lands. So they're taking a problem that is evident in these water quality type situations, and they're trying to repurpose it for bettering the environment. So nothing goes to waste, but the water quality issue can be resolved through something of this nature. We've seen on the news about red tide, different water quality issues, runoff, things of that sort. So I like looking for these different kind of pieces coming together that don't often get shared in media. I've seen this in Virginia's elk country. I've been to coal country where they're actually rehabilitating our state's elk population. A lot of people who work in coal and gas, you would never think that these individuals would have an interest in seeing this species make a resurgence or have a resurgence and make kind of a comeback. And it's them and private individuals alongside the state wildlife agency, different nonprofits like the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, working together to ensure that this species really is rehabilitated, much like some of the other populations on the East Coast. So it's really fascinating stuff. I'm also embedded in these activities too. I fish. I just became a hunter a few years ago. I like shooting guns, and I like looking for different components to that and getting people interested through my reporting work. And I'm lucky to have clients that also share my same vision, where they want me to create content for them so we can maximize our reach and really get that perspective out there and showcase something positive too. I think so much is negative in the media cycle, and that'd be such a waste of the platform I have if I'm just constantly like trying to expose our political opponents or just report on negative stuff, which is fun to do and it gets you clicks and engagement. But like sometimes I feel like people don't look out for original content, or they don't care unless if it's like something relating to the national dialogue or if it's convenient to them. So I try to encourage people like, hey, check out my original work. Like I'm not just a bumbling media talker, like I'm actually delivering stuff. So I want my example to serve for people watching or people who follow my work. If it's a young professional too, who wants to go into media, to be a good example of that. You can create content, really make waves with it and get people to start a conversation or enact change in their communities. And I like showcasing that you don't have to be a stuffy journalist who's elitist and out of touch. I interact with regular people all the time. I like enjoying hobbies with them. I learned how to do more horseback riding. I go fishing and hunting with people. I go shooting at the range. I do a lot of cool stuff with different people because I can relate to them with these different hobbies. And I think that's also a good way to foster community a lot more, even beyond politics. Like I'll work with people who disagree with me. And I think working in the outdoor industry in the way that I do with these different forays into podcasting, media creation, content creation, I get to interact with people who don't agree with me politically too. And I think beyond kind of political work, you do find that there is an interest to get along with people, to find commonality with different subjects. You may have different means of reaching an ends in terms of solutions, but at least you can come down, sit together, whether it's on a campfire, on a river, whatever, and talk about things that you have commonality in. And so it's a lot that I do. I think that's a little much, but it kind of a full spectrum view into my work. But yeah, I work on a multitude of subjects. I've worked with organizations and people who I don't really focus on. Like I once had a startup company of a former student I worked with at Leadership Institute who started a tech company, or a cybersecurity company, excuse me, to help center right lawmakers. So I even work in niche areas where I have no familiarity with, but I can assess how I can help them get media coverage or get them placed in media and really take off their business if they're just starting, or help an existing brand kind of rebrand to outside of politics or inside politics. So I've had
I'm curious real quick. I mean, from when you graduated to now, I mean, it's been a decade. Media has changed what media is, social media. And I graduated right before you in 2011. And I saw it too, as I worked in politics and in public policy, of just this sea change of you're your own brand and your own content creator. And I think that's interesting because you have kind of the looking back and looking forward from, it was just traditional media. And now you can be your own media company, basically, if you do it right. But you're talking about it takes a long time to build these relationships. When people think of pure media relations and how pitching works, I think a lot of folks don't understand of it. I mean, you mentioned it takes years sometimes to build relationships with reporters or even to get that first story placed. It's not just, sometimes you have a good pitch and it works, and that happens a lot, but a lot of times it takes a long time to build these things up. And I don't know, I think that's important with folks going into communications or media relations or even PR. A lot of times you're not going to get that big hit. It might take a while. And I worked at a big PR firm, and it was like that. It was go, go, go. It was, we want to be in the New York Times. And it's like, that's great. I can't give them an op-ed of your product because that's not how it works. You know, it's educating them as well. So I think that's interesting because a lot of folks don't understand that side of it and the time it takes to build that up. If you're obviously good at what you do, so it works well, but it takes patience. It takes a lot.
You will find that among people who go on TV, some really popular people, well-known entities, you hear their stories, they'll tell you it took them years. It took them sleeping on the floor of their siblings' apartment in New York City to go to Fox News or some other media outlet many, many times before they were able to get on TV and routinely be guests and even contributors to Fox News. And you'll hear from people like me say that it takes years upon years, even when people know who you are and you're a known entity, but they just don't know where you are at. You have to just reintroduce yourself and you have to present yourself differently. But even if you don't get an acceptance of a pitch or you don't get an article placed, that doesn't mean it's the end of the world. I always tell people I've had many rejections from editors across the years. I've been told, well, your work will be great, but here's where you can improve. So I've experienced my share of rejection from editors and others with positions of power when it comes to different media placements, whether it's me pitching for myself or pitching on behalf of clients, because especially now with this 24/7 news cycle and everything is political now, which is crazy. Because when I first started and when we were going into college in our time, in our iteration of college, media was just becoming 24/7. Not everything was still political yet. Now it seems like every corner of society, you cannot escape politics, which is exhausting if you ask me. And I'm as political as they come. I love politics. I find it to be interesting. It's crazy at times too, but it's something that fascinates me and something I've been able to have a bird's eye view into for the better part of a decade. But I think because everything is political, it makes bookers from TV or editors or others just uninterested unless they can keep the news cycle going or keep certain things in the news cycle. And unless if it's super relevant or newsworthy, they're not going to break stories, unfortunately. So you have to capture their attention with something unique. It can relate to the news cycle, but I would think it would be better that they can find content that isn't already being cycled in the news cycle. If it's a news breaking story or a tip or something positive, like I know, what was it? Some story that's super interesting. And actually an acquaintance of mine is just interviewed this guy. Did you see the video of the gentleman who fended off a bobcat attack?
Yeah, I did. And he throws it. Yeah.
Yes.
I did.
Yeah. So one of my acquaintances who runs a popular show in Texas, a podcast there too, he just interviewed the guy. So I'm like, this is really cool. Like you actually spoke to the guy behind the viral video. That's great.
I wanted to say somebody had to have found him and talked to him because that is about
I think he reached out to him.
Story. Okay. That's about the craziest video you'll ever watch.
Yes.
But very funny. But I think that's of a viral sense, but people would be interested to hear that guy's story. Like, what were you thinking? So
yeah, because I could imagine crossing his mind was the fact, like, is this cat rabid? Does it have rabies? Is it infected with something? Is it potentially am I going to get a scar from being bitten from it? Like, is it a threatening creature? Yeah. Attacking family. Like, I mean, that would be going through my head if I had encountered a bobcat like he did, but like good for him for trying to remain cool. And I mean, in that instance, he had to use those means. I know some people, like other people who are attacked by bobcats will use firearms to repel them and they'll be like, oh no. But like, I don't think regardless of where you stand on managing these type of predators like that, I think everyone, regardless of their stances on firearms or managing bobcats, were very much in agreement about like, oh, wow, he used like this method. Like, and hopefully no one thought like the cat, I think the cat is okay. I don't know if they euthanized it, but I found that story to be super interesting. I'm going to listen to that interview later. And yeah, I just think like stuff like that is interesting. Like we have that viral component to it, but there's like a story behind the viral video or something super interesting. Like I said, like some of the work I've been doing, I don't want to toot my own horn. I feel like people would really like it because it's different. You get to hear from different newsmakers. You hear my narration for some of the projects I work on, but the focus is on these people I talk to. I don't want it to be on me or about like, look how cool I'm doing, or look how cool I look doing these different projects. And it's like so many people have stories and they just go unnoticed. And I hate that, personally speaking. So I've made it my mission to be like, whether it's through my podcast or my town hall column or through collaborations with nonprofits that work with me on free market environmentalism stuff, they like my vision, or I want to pursue something and we can execute it. We don't need to go through a traditional media outlet. Some traditional media outlets may take an interest in my projects, but I don't want to inundate some of the context I have with, here's a story that I did, like, can you guys run it or can you guys cover it? I leave it open for people to absorb it, take it, leave it, whatever. But it's like, I would hope more people create content and not just rehash like different hot takes or things of that sort, because how I noticed that I was able to break out, and others like me who've kind of really succeeded on this independent journalism front, you take issues that no one really touches or that could be controversial. You bring on guests, you cover stuff in depth, you try to be fair. Obviously, you admit your bias. I admit my bias for certain things if I have to. But you can take issues that no one is touching upon, explain them, explain legislation, explain things that are happening, and really get people to think on different issues. Like, I know a very controversial subject. There was a story just recently about how the government of Zimbabwe is opening up not trophy hunting per se, but a management of elephants in Zimbabwe. And it costs $70,000 for you to help manage the herd. And by means of hunting or so-called trophy hunting, that's caused I would say it's caused the ire of different environmentalists, animal rights activists who've said, oh my gosh, how can you kill these elephants? And personally speaking, as a hunter, I would never hunt elephants, but I see the value and I understand Africa's conservation model, which is a little different than ours, but somewhat similar in many cases, where elephants are predators to a lot of villages and the people there. And if they're not managed, they can become a big nuisance. So you hear from different wildlife biologists who I think we can lean on and trust their judgment. There was one individual who was touting this and talking about the merits behind this program and how that it's not going to take away the whole herd in Africa of these different elephants in Zimbabwe. And who can afford $70,000 to help manage the herd? Very few people. So people, I mean, would you rather? I think people have to come to grips with thinking, and in the United States, like, I mean, we love animals. I have a reverence for animals, even animals that I think that should be managed. And I think you could have that dual kind of feeling. You can have that sensation and understanding of managing a species and then also revering them and wanting to see them thrive. And I think people don't understand that you can share both of those thoughts. And well, so
you and I also don't have to worry about an elephant crashing through our house.
No.
Hopefully. So.
In California, you have to worry about bobcats and mountain lions, however.
We do, which my family actually saw last night.
You're serious?
It was like a baby one, but it.
They can be dangerous.
Yeah, it's just, and we have young kids, so it's like, okay, let's go the other way, and it ran away. But I get that of, you go to the zoo, elephants are great. We don't live in Africa where there are insane predators, and it's not like Texas where you're pig hunting or you're boar hunting to get rid of the population. It's like a 1,000-pound elephant is a much different thing than dealing with, thinning herds and making sure it's the right population.
And it's much more.
We don't have that here. We don't have those type of issues. So.
And having that in place, even with its controversy attached to it, is much more preferable than poaching. Poaching disgusts me. And you talk to any hunter like me, you'll see that we are very disgusted by poaching. So this is far more preferable. You thin the herd, you don't take out the whole herd, and you keep the poachers at bay, because with this funding coming in, it's not only going to help with the population of elephants, it's also going to help funding, I have no doubt, rangers who help patrol and help protect against poachers with respect to that. But it's stories like that. I like to cover those stories. That big documentary CNN had put out was really interesting. I think they had wanted to come out with the conclusion that what this practice was horrific. Actually, the filmmakers came out saying we actually much more prefer this than poaching writ large coming there. So it's something interesting. It is controversial. It certainly pulls at the heartstrings. And actually, it's so interesting. You'll even find among animal rights activists and even some environmentalists, their opposition against zoos, which makes no sense to me. zoos are phenomenal educational facilities. How I was able to take an interest in wildlife, I went to the San Diego Zoo or SeaWorld, and I got to see those different animals, rare animals, commonly known species in the flesh. They seem to be doing well. And I know with certain captivity practices, sometimes those species outlive their counterparts in the wild. And what they do a lot of the times in zoos is they take those populations, if they're able to breed them successfully, and take them back to their native countries and reintroduce them successfully. So there's so much that goes into that. And I think a frontier we're going to see is it's not simply opposing trophy hunting. Even I think you're going to see, I think, a movement build to perhaps get rid of zoos, and even SeaWorld. SeaWorld's faced a lot of, I would say, negative press following that documentary Blackfish. And they suffered a lot because of it financially. And I have no doubt they'll find some way to get at zoos if they don't already want to attack zoos.
Is the argument with zoos, and I guess I get this, of they're in a box, they're enclosed, they don't have, it's not their natural habitat, they can't roam. I mean, I assume it's the argument of they're pretty much, I guess, locked away.
Yeah.
Is that kind of okay? I mean,
I think
I get it, but we have a small zoo where I live, and there is nothing exotic. It's animals who were hurt or they found. So there's like 2 bears that were hurt, or they broke their leg, and these are animals rehabilitated. So it's a little different, but it's a zoo and it's local animals. But I know a lot of zoos are doing that now, where it's animals who've been hurt, whether exotic or otherwise, and they bring them in, and it's more they're caring for these animals who probably wouldn't have made it. But
that's a component to it too. Yeah. They take in injured animals or maybe abandoned babies, perhaps. I want to explore the subject more, actually. This is something on my mind because I feel like they're going to get to zoos at some point once they get to hunters.
They'll just open the doors and let them run out.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I think people think because they're being exploited for amusement. I think that's also an opposition. And sure, I could maybe see that, us greedy Americans, we want to have animals at our leisure to admire. But I think it's even beyond that. There's a greater conservation component to it as well. You get to see, I mean, what's wrong with us knowing about endangered species that are being rehabilitated and reintroduced to the wild? I think it's educational and informative for us to see them, and to see them in a zoo could really contextualize for people, kids, adults, elderly folks, how important it is to have these efforts continue and see that, oh my gosh, it exists. Like, look how valuable this is. We don't want to ruin their habitat. We don't want to extirpate them from existence with poaching or something of that nature. So you can really have like emotional appeals to people when you show them these animals and you see them and you kind of like get this affinity for them and see like, wow, this is so awesome. Like, we have to respect it and see it thrive, of course. So yeah, I think they're like, well, it's for like the entertainment and amusement of Americans because we're all so greedy. And I'm like, you don't understand the concept of zoological societies and what they're really intending to do. And I think the San Diego Zoo, interestingly enough, it's a private zoo. And I feel like it's the best zoo. I'm biased, having lived in California, obviously. But it really is one of the best examples of a zoo run really well. That's why it's super popular. Pre-COVID, of course, and hopefully once COVID subsides, people will start to go there again. But really such an educational place. You can't not have fun there. It's great for kids. I remember going there really early, and we'd also go to the zoological park in Escondido, a little more inland from San Diego, and see their wild animal park there, which was great. A very cool thing. And I've gone to like the Los Angeles Zoo and the Orange County Zoo. I've even been to the DC Zoo, which is a unique place in its own right, being managed by the Smithsonian. But yeah, it's just a really interesting place. And I think people misunderstand what their utility is for.
So we're pro zoo on this interview. Well, I think it's interesting, and I've talked about this with other folks about an original story. And a lot of times it's a story, and that sounds like you look for this, it's a story nobody's writing. And that can be hard of, is it tied into Biden? Is it tied into this issue? Is it tied into that? And you can do that, but I think a lot of folks, and I think you found this, of get success of like, a lot of people aren't writing these stories, or it's just an original take on something that people don't know about. And I think in the 24-hour news and everything that happens, that has gotten so lost, or you write it and it's not political and people don't want to read it. And
which is a shame.
No.
And actually that's how I became an award-winning outdoor writer. It was at the height of, it was fall 2018, and a story came down from Montana of a federal judge. This was after the Department of Interior affirming different studies and even affirming the Obama administration's conclusion to delist the greater Yellowstone ecosystem bear. The states of, I believe it was Wyoming and Idaho, because Montana already has, I think, a bear hunt, or they already had something in place. So they weren't, I forget exactly if they were or not exploring it, but it was Idaho and Wyoming that wanted to explore a bear hunt. And from there, people sued to prevent that from happening. And a judge ruled on the case, Judge Christensen of Montana's federal court down there, and said that there was limited science to justify the delisting of this, I would say, DPS segment bear, this particular strain of bear, which got its own recognition in 2007, 2005, early 2000s. The bear was kind of regulated and managed in kind of its own separate fashion from like the 5 other strains of grizzly bears. It's complicated. I won't go too much into it, but this particular segment of grizzly bear was known to be very well studied, successfully recovered. And even today, right now, I think the bear now stands at 1,000 population strong, which is far beyond the threshold for recovery. So I saw people reporting that issue, the judge handing down the ruling, and I spoke to people in the field who either bear hunt themselves or are bear conservationists who said, actually, we agree with delisting, and this hunt not taking place is actually going to incur a lot of harm, not only for monies that come in through conservation, through license tag sales, but also for farmers and ranchers who deal with predators, these bear coming in and attacking livestock. And it's not only people worrying about monetary loss or attacks from bears, it's also kind of a concern among different species. So these aggressive bears that are not managed can actually attack others in their population. So grizzly bears are known to attack black bears and other grizzly bears. And you don't need a science background to know this. So when they're highly aggressive and unmanaged, they're going to attack others in kind of their domain. And it's really bad for them if their more aggressive counterparts are not properly managed. And when people don't understand that, they just kind of go about emotional appeal. So I spoke to a bear hunter, a TV host, and also they both of the individuals I had to comment on my piece that eventually went on to win an award, were in the field in both Montana and Wyoming. And they just gave their perspective and said it would just be foolish to not rule and to not manage the species according to science. So more so it was ruled on emotion and politics rather than the science, repeatedly affirmed by different administrations, wildlife biologists, who concluded this population of the bear is healthy and deserves to be recovered after meeting, I think it was a 1993 recovery plan threshold of 500 individuals. They started to exceed that with 700 bears strong. Now it's over 1,000. I think they were undercounting it. I don't know why, but that was recent news that came in. So I took that story, just ran with it, really wanted to deliver kind of the straight news, not so much insert my opinion, but you could tell from how I was orienting the piece, I was sympathetic to it, but I wasn't really saying like, yes, you have to delist the bear, but I was orienting it in a way like, hey, this perspective, we're not hearing this. Here are people who live on the ground, have to deal with this and are concerned. And here's, you get both sides of the argument. I included why the judge ruled this and all that, but I also included their perspective. And the individuals who preside over and judged the contest that I entered, and it's through an organization I work with called the Professional Outdoor Media Association. In my first year, I wasn't even a voting member. I was an associate media member, and they liked it so much that they thought I should win the conservation award, the top category there. So it was really an honor to do that and just to get that perspective out there and get people to think on this issue. And I've had people come to me even since then and say, wow, this is so fascinating. Like, I don't support hunting, but I can be sympathetic to this, kind of like with the Africa issue with elephants. It's kind of actually very similar because bears are invading people's territories. They've exceeded their carrying capacity. Their range is huge and they've met the threshold for recovery and delisting. And it's just because people are playing politics with the bear out of emotional appeals and they don't want to see it successfully recovered. That's really what the crux of it is. Like, if you want, let's say, the Endangered Species Act to work, you need to delist the bear. You need
unendangered eventually.
Yeah, because you can't keep that bear in perpetuity on the list. It's not founded in science. it's really detrimental to the key stakeholders and players out west who have to live with the bears. And it's people just playing on emotion to fundraise and also to sue in perpetuity too. They use different laws in our books to collect lawyers' fees so they could sue and sue and sue and hold the bear hostage. And like I said, it's not just humans who seek to be at the detriment of these different obstacles. It's also the bears too. You're not thinking in the bear's well-being if you're wanting to keep it on a list of the endangered species with threatened or endangered protections. Right now, it has threatened protections again because of a Court of Appeals ruling from California that said the bear hasn't recovered. They were using politics, the Trump administration. So right now, it'll be interesting to see if Biden's administration follows the lead of both Obama and Trump's administration in proposing to delist the bear. I don't know if we're going to see that, but I want to remain optimistic that science will prevail.
That is a rabbit hole about bears.
Yes.
Well, I think we've given people a lot. Where can folks go to read that story, to read your work, listen to you? Where do we find you?
Sure. Well, that story that I alluded to is in Sporting Classics. It was published about 3 years ago, and you can find it there. It's Judicial Review Should End Trump Wildlife Management. For the most part, you can follow me on social media. My website is a great funnel for all my social media channels. It's GabriellaHoffman.com. I also podcast with the District of Conservation podcast, where I talk about these interesting issues too. Town Hall, find my columns there. I write several times a week, both, what would you say, VIP columns, which are only accessible to subscribers, and also regular columns that come out on Fridays as well. But sometimes I mix it up and I post apart from my regular schedule day. And Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, I'm denoted by blue check marks on all those different outlets. So you have no trouble finding me. I have a YouTube channel where I try to explore more of these subjects. I post all my interviews with lawmakers and individuals there, and I try to have fun with it. And if anyone wants to learn more about my work and also to help fight the PRO Act, I would be more than happy to educate and inform and get you plugged into all these different subjects.
Great. Well, we'll link to the bear story because that was your great one. But we'll when we post this, we'll have all those links so folks can follow. So I'll give you the last word and then we can sign off.
Yeah, I think when it comes to media, I guess, or running a business, I think people forget that you can be, I guess, a multimedia person. And I think you should be. And I don't want to just focus on media. And people think you're just a journalist or you're just a writer. And that's a small component to what I do. But I really fundamentally believe that you can work in media and successfully be in business. And I try to cover different areas of interest. I work with people sometimes for fundraising. I try to be a Jill of all trades. I try to have a different skill set and I've learned different things and to try to make myself stand out to prospective clients. And I think kind of a takeaway that I would love your listeners and viewers to absorb from this is that when people have limited opportunities to rise the ranks, to climb the economic ladder through means like freelancing, if that is taken away or it's fundamentally transformed where everyone's a default employee, that really will undercut at the essence of this country. My parents came here fleeing socialism in the Soviet Union, and I never would have thought that they would try to play with this here and do this here and restrict people from wanting to really explore their economic potential. And I would caution against people supporting the PRO Act, really trusting the government to manipulate the economy, to artificially change it or give preferential treatment to certain workforces over others, and really just elevate a industry, unionized workforce, which is on the decline. And that's not to say like boo-hoo, good riddance, but the market is trending towards people becoming self-employed or gig workers. And that's a reality people have to embrace. We're not in the 1930s, we're not in the 1950s even. And the fact that labor policy is being guided by really ridiculous, archaic policies of the past doesn't mesh well with what is happening and what needs to be happening. Just creating fewer roadblocks to people to go from a one-person business to eventually whether a small business or even a big corporation, if someone wants to do that. A corporation didn't just start out being a corporation. It was a one-person business or two business partners coming together to form a business and taking it to great heights. So we can't limit our economic potential. And please join us in this fight to preserve freelancing.
Great. All right, Gabrielle, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Evan.